Coming up, we're going to be looking back at all of the good stuff that happened over the weekend and some of the bad stuff and some of the indifferent stuff, of course, as well. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was in Teesside talking levelling up.
Yeah, well, these 30 towns come on top of the 70 that have already been announced. That's 100 towns across our country. They're going to receive £20 million each. And crucially, it will be local people in all those areas are in charge of how to spend that money to make sure it's spent and invested on their priorities. An example of us levelling up everywhere, backing local people and their priorities and giving them the long-term funding assurance to do so.
Lib Dem leader Ed Davey was in Harpenden talking about healthcare.
Our main messages in the election have been on the health service and care. Health service is on its knees, and it needs to be rescued, particularly with more GPs, more NHS dentists and investment in care. But we're also talking about our economic ideas to grow our economy and also deal with the cost of living.
And Yvette Cooper, who's of course the Shadow Home Secretary, was on Laura Kunsberg on the BBC talking migration targets.
A normal level would be around 200,000. So is that what you mean? Is that the kind of number?
Well, again, and I understand the question, and I know that you're effectively trying to suggest I set a target or a broad target. I'm not going to do that. We are going to be clear. Net migration must come down. We believe it's really important, and what Keir has set out is commitments that we will bring net migration down.
So that sets the scene for what we're going to be talking about throughout the course of the day today. There'll be, of course, other announcements. The front page is full of the gender story because, of course, Kemi Badenoch is going to be speaking later on. She basically wants to change the Equality Act. She says sex is a fact, not anything other than that, a fact of biology. The Tories are pledging a change in the law to clarify sex and gender definitions to safeguard women. Some would say not before time. Let's talk to Theo Usherwood, who's a political commentator who's with us this morning. Theo, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Very good morning to you, Mike.
Good to talk to you. Let's kick off with Yvette Cooper. Obviously, migration and immigration levels have become a massive story. Lots of people have been sending me messages this morning to say, you know, this is still the biggest story of the election, whether anybody likes it or not. She was pressed a little bit, Yvette Cooper, yesterday to give some figures and some numbers as to what the immigration target level would be. She didn't want to, and she didn't want to say by when either.
No, so this is Labour's promise, and this is Keir Starmer's promise and Yvette Cooper's promise, that they are saying that they will cut net migration. We've seen it soar to record levels, Mike. Reform with Nigel Farage and Richard Tyson making great political capital out of it, especially around the small boats. It was more than 700,000 in the year to 2022. It came down a little bit last year, didn't we? We heard about 10 days ago, right, to just under 700,000. Now, you'd think it would be reasonable to ask Labour that if they win power, what is the level of net migration going to be and when is it going to be? But Yvette Cooper yesterday refusing to give a number, and it is a reasonable question of journalists to ask, like yourself, like myself, like Laura Kunsberg even, to say, what are you going to get it down to? Now, the normal level was 200,000. That was what we were seeing as roughly acceptable. And David Cameron in 2010 said he wanted to get it down even further to the tens of thousands. Yeah. But of course, he missed that target, didn't he? He kept on missing that target. And it was that failure that ultimately helped to build the pressure. It was a contributory factor. It was not the only factor towards the Tories saying on the backbenches, we want to leave the European Union because we want to take control of our borders. Now, of course, that's happened. We've left the EU, but in terms of taking control of our borders, if you look at the numbers, it hasn't really transpired the way that those who are promoting Brexit has said it would. And that's why Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, they don't want to get into this numbers game because they don't want you asking, having a minister on, and there'll be a Labour minister on in 2027 saying, now you said you'd reduce it to 200,000 and you failed. Look at what you've done. And that's why they're trying to stop themselves being a hostage to fortune.
Well, I can see that that's what they're trying to do, but that doesn't really play, does it? Because Keir Starmer, just a couple of days earlier, had said, read my lips, I'm going to slash mass migration. Now, if you're going to slash something, you have to have a target by which you're going to slash it. And I was rather surprised that he invoked that rather old phrase that was first used, I think, by George W. Bush, wasn't it? Well, not W, but by his dad, actually, George Herbert Walker Bush, who said, read my lips, no new taxes.
Yes, and Boris Johnson used that in the 2019 campaign and then promptly raised a national insurance contribution. So it seems to be, if you use that phrase, you end up doing whatever you said you weren't going to be doing.
Right.
And look, he doesn't. You're quite right. You've got to give the voters something to measure you by. So what equals success? If you're going to slash something and you get it down by 300,000, is that a success? If you slash it, do you get it down by 3,000? Obviously, that's not a success, but they could still say that they brought net migration down, and that's why I think voters have a right to feel a little bit confused or being kept in the dark a bit about what Labour actually plans to do. But Keir Starmer's hoping that we're going to move on to discuss other things, and the sort of campaign bus will literally and metaphorically roll on.
Yeah, I watched Angela Rayner telling an interview back end of last week that she's got her own battle bus. I wait to see that one. I haven't seen it yet. But maybe she's got two, one for when she wants to stay with her husband and one when she doesn't. But, she's basically gone on the attack, hasn't she, now that she's been cleared of the housing situation. The Tory party making hay out of the fact that Keir Starmer's had yet another U-turn, this time on Diane Abbott.
Yes, there's been another U-turn because he said that Diane Abbott is free to stand. There was some speculation yesterday and over the weekend that Diane Abbott, having scored that victory, might actually just decide that she doesn't want to stand again. Then there was the story that Keir Starmer had been offering peerages to left-wing MPs like Diane Abbott, that if you go and you stand and if you go and take a seat in the House of Lords and go quietly, then you could go into the Lords and become a peer. But now we heard from Diane Abbott last night that she fully intends to stand as a Labour MP. And of course, those nominations are closing tomorrow. So we'll get the full list of all the candidates from all the parties for all the seats. And we're expecting, if things remain the hokey-cokey on whether Diane Abbott stands or not stops, we're expecting her to be on the ballot paper over in Hackney for tomorrow for the general election on July the 4th.
Yes, which makes it look as though Keir Starmer's not really running the party, doesn't it?
Yes, who's running the party? Is it Angela Rayner who says, actually, I think Diane Abbott should be standing in this election, when there's an equivocation and Diane Abbott says that actually she's been told that she can't stand in the election, and then that transpires to be true? Or is it actually Keir Starmer? It doesn't look good for his authority, but the main thing is, I think, for Keir Starmer's point of view, that he stops it here. And there are other left-wing MPs like Faiza Shaheen over in Chingford and Woodford Green, and Lloyd Russell Moyle down on the south coast. And if he could stop them standing, then at least he could say, well, I've got some authority, I've managed to stop this happening, and just accept that Diane Abbott is an icon of the left wing within the Labour Party, and just say, actually, this was a fight that he couldn't win.
Yeah, absolutely right. The Greens popped up as well on Sunday morning, and I saw that Adrian Ramsey, the leader of the Green Party, made two comments that I thought were interesting. One, that they've given up on the idea of rationing food, which, to be honest, I didn't know they had as an idea, but it's not going to be on their manifesto. They think we're all eating too much meat and dairy food, and there was some suggestion that they might actually suggest, bizarrely, that we should ration meat and dairy, so you wouldn't be able to buy as much as you wanted to. They'd make sure that you were doing enough to save the planet. And the other thing he said was that 3 potential candidates have been removed from being Green Party candidates because of anti-Semitic things that they've either said or liked on social media.
Yes, and this is a problem. We saw it, didn't we, during the local elections? Obviously, there's the Green Party has become a protest party for the left. Okay, you've got the Liberal Democrats, that they might take a protest from Conservative voters, but there are those on the left wing that of the Labour Party who might be fed up with Keir Starmer, who are actually starting now to look seriously at the Greens. And those two stories you mentioned, Mike, are tangentially related to each other, because firstly, they need to ditch the silly policies like rationing food. They could get, if they get serious, they might be actually able to win more than one seat in the House of Commons if they can pick up those left-wing votes. But if people start thinking, hang on a moment, I'm not going to be able to go and buy my eggs, even if they're organic, and even if they're organic, then they're not going to necessarily take the Green Party seriously. So they need to get rid of the silly policies, and I think that's the first thing. But secondly, they've had to kick out these candidates because there are those on the left wing of the Labour Party, or those who Keir Starmer quite rightly will say, actually, good riddance, we've got rid of them. And the Green Party's been described by Peter Mandelson actually as a repository for those people that Labour are trying to kick out. They've gone into the Green Party, and what do you know? They're still expressing opinions, anti-Semitic opinions. Now, I don't know if that relates specifically to those three candidates that you talked about, Mike, but there is a general trend that actually, if the Labour Party's got rid of these people, have they got a political home at the moment? And there are question marks actually now, are they starting to look towards the Greens? Now, Reform is putting huge pressure on the Conservative Party. Can the Greens do the same to Labour Party at this general election and Keir Starmer, if he becomes Prime Minister? That remains to be seen, and whether they have the organisation and the Reform have, and the money that Reform has, to be able to put the same sort of pressure, but from the left rather than the right, onto Labour Party and make Keir Starmer sweat a bit.
Yeah, meanwhile, the Tories are putting pressure from the right, I suppose you would say. PopCon, which didn't really get terribly far, but it's got Liz Truss and Jacob Rees-Mogg excited. They're basically saying that Rishi Sunak should ditch net zero before the election.
Yeah, I think there's a feeling, particularly on the right, as they keep on looking at these polls, and they looked at the MRP poll, that super poll, which put the Conservatives winning something between 66 and 72 seats.
Yeah.
Right? And they're looking at it and they're going, we are literally heading over a cliff into electoral oblivion. This is what's going to happen. We're going to end up with most of the cabinet losing their seats, most MPs losing their seats, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, if you look at this poll, by the way, down in Somerset. And they're really worried. And now the penny is starting to drop that something drastic has to happen. But Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, their whole pitch is about being responsible. They're not going to promise unfunded tax cuts, and they're not going to necessarily do things the way that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Liz Truss want them to do. And there's this tension building within the Conservative Party that there are Conservative MPs who are facing losing their jobs in about 5 weeks' time, and Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt simply aren't willing to pull the levers necessary to try and broaden the appeal and do something about the Conservative polling position. And there's a real frustration there from the likes of Liz Truss, from Jacob Rees-Mogg. They know exactly what's going to be happening, Mike. They're going to be out of a job, or many of their number are going to be out of a job. And Rishi Sunak just simply doesn't seem able or willing to turn it around. So if he's not going to turn it around with his own policies, they're saying, let's look at some other policies we know are popular, like abolishing net zero altogether, like some actual tax cuts that people might vote for, and try and, if we're not going to win this election, at least stop us from being decimated.
Right. And the big first sort of debate taking place tomorrow night, which we can all watch, of course. I mean, they'll be hoping, presumably, by Wednesday morning, that there'll be some kind of, I'm talking about the Tories here, hoping there'll be some kind of polling effect, which will look as if the debate has helped them.
We all, you know, you and I, Mike, and your listeners, they'll often just think, actually, will I tune into the leaders' debates, or am I going to find something more interesting to watch? In the media, we hold great political value to these leaders' debates, but they're not the same as the American debates. They haven't been the same in this country since 2010, when Nick Clegg actually managed to land a few blows against Gordon Brown and David Cameron. They're usually fairly staid affairs. They get a statement at the beginning, they get a statement at the end. They can talk, but they have to talk because we have Ofcom all of the necessary safeguards when it comes to elections. They talk for prescribed amounts of time. And what that means is that actually they don't necessarily give the voters that moment, that huge battle where somebody completely falls apart or somebody scores a massive win that we might be hoping for. And both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are quite experienced at this. The public know them. They're not going to turn around and say, oh, that's a side of Keir Starmer I didn't know. Oh, but Rishi Sunak said something there that's completely surprised me. I'm going to go and vote for him. It's going to be... people might think, well, there'll be a great change in the polls, but I somehow doubt it. There needs to be a policy, or somebody needs... You remember when Gordon Brown got back in that car and he had his microphone on and he described the woman as a bigot? Yeah. That's what needs to happen, basically. Right. Because it needs something seismic to change people's opinions. Because at the moment, we're just heading towards this election. People are maybe falling asleep a bit about it, because it is a bit boring, as you said. It's not had that moment. And if it does, then people might wake up and start paying attention. But right now, I don't see the leaders' debates and ITV, they could get very excited about it, but I don't see it changing that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Theo, thank you very much indeed. Theo Usherwood there with his take on the big political news of the weekend and what's coming up in the next couple of days, of course, as well.